She's just a nobody. Mom laughed at me. Until my brother's fiancé, search my name on Google and everything changed. I remember that day like it was yesterday, the moment my mother laughed in my face and called me just a nobody. It wasn't an angry outburst, more like a dismissive remark, the kind that stings deep because you know she believes it. I'd spent my whole life feeling like I was fighting for a place, for some kind of recognition in my family. But every time I thought I was moving forward, something like this would bring me crashing down. My name is Olivia, and for years, I struggled to find my worth in the eyes of my family. My brother, who was always the golden child, received all the attention, all the praise. My mother was so consumed with him that I felt invisible. Nothing I did ever seemed to matter. I was constantly overlooked and dismissed, but I learned to cope with it, or so I thought. One afternoon, my mom was talking about my brother's fiancée and how perfect she was. I'd never had much of a relationship with her, but I wasn't worried until the day she asked about me. "What's Olivia up to these days?" she asked with curiosity. My mom didn't even flinch when she said, "Oh, she's just a nobody, probably still trying to figure out what she wants to do with her life." The words hit harder than I ever expected. It was like all the years of being ignored and diminished suddenly exploded in my face. I could feel my heart sink, but I didn't show it. I swallowed the pain and walked away, determined to make something of myself. I didn't need her approval, I told myself. I would prove her wrong. Little did I know, everything was about to change, and it all started with a simple Google search. A few weeks after that moment, my brother's fiancée, Sarah, called me. She had just moved to town to be closer to the family, and my brother suggested we meet up. I was a little hesitant at first, unsure if I was ready to face her after everything that had been said. But then again, I figured this was my chance to build a relationship with her and possibly show my family that I wasn't just a nobody. We met at a local cafe. At first, it felt like any regular conversation, casual and a little awkward. But there was something about Sarah's curiosity that made me open up. She asked me about my career, what I was passionate about, and what I'd been working on. For once, someone was genuinely interested in my life, not because they had to be, but because they wanted to know. It felt good to talk without being interrupted or dismissed. But then the conversation took an unexpected turn. Sarah casually mentioned how she was curious about my background. "I just want to know everything about you," she said. "I'm thinking of Googling your name to see what comes up. You never know what you might find online." I wasn't sure if she was joking or not, but I found myself a bit uncomfortable. I hadn't thought about how the internet could portray me. I had some success with my career, but there wasn't much that really stood out to the public eye. Still, I laughed it off and said, "Go ahead. I'm not really famous or anything." She smiled and pulled out her phone, typing my name into the search bar. I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe a few old social media posts or a forgotten blog I once started, but I wasn't ready for what actually came up. Sarah's eyes widened. "Olivia, is this really you?" she asked, showing me the screen. On the search results, there were articles about my work, features from magazines, interviews I'd done in the past, and even some projects I'd worked on that had gotten local media attention. The pages I thought no one had ever read were out there for the world to see. It wasn't huge fame, but it was recognition I'd earned. And I hadn't even realized how much my name had been mentioned online. It felt surreal to see it all laid out like that. I froze. "What is this?" I asked, feeling the shock begin to set in. Sarah smiled a little. "You've been doing some amazing things, Olivia. You really aren't just a nobody, are you?" I felt a flood of emotions hit me at once. Surprise, pride, disbelief. Here I was, having spent my entire life feeling invisible, and now someone who was close to my family was seeing me in a completely new light. It was like a door had just opened to a world I had only dreamed of being part of. That day, everything changed. I realized that the narrative I had been living by, the one where I was small and unimportant, wasn't true. The world was seeing me for my accomplishments, my hard work, and my determination. Sarah had just opened my eyes to the fact that I wasn't invisible after all. After that conversation with Sarah, I couldn't stop thinking about the search results. I spent hours that night Googling myself, something I had never really done before. I found articles, interviews, and even social media posts from people who had attended events I worked at or collaborated with me on various projects. I was taken aback. It wasn't that I thought I was doing anything extraordinary, but seeing everything laid out in front of me like that made me realize just how much I had achieved without even realizing it. Sarah's casual comment had sparked something in me that I hadn't seen before, a sense of recognition. Not from my family, but from the outside world. I hadn't felt like I belonged in my family's narrative, the one where my brother was always the shining star. But here I was, successful in my own right, making an impact in my field and gaining recognition for it. The next time I saw my mom, I was ready to talk. I couldn't let that moment go. Her dismissiveness, the way she'd so easily written me off as just a nobody. I needed her to see that I was no longer the person she thought I was. I called her up and asked if we could sit down for a coffee. The tension was palpable when I arrived, but I didn't waste any time. I looked her in the eye and said, "You remember when you called me a nobody?" She shifted in her seat, and I could see the hesitation in her eyes. "I didn't mean it like that," she said quickly, her voice faltering a little. But I wasn't backing down. It didn't matter how you meant it. It mattered how it made me feel. For years, I've worked hard, built a name for myself, and done things that I'm proud of. But you never saw me. You always saw my brother, the perfect one. I was invisible to you. There was a long pause. I could see the guilt on her face, but I didn't want to sugarcoat it anymore. I wasn't asking for an apology. I was asking for her to acknowledge the truth. "I'm not a nobody, Mom," I said, feeling the weight of those words for the first time. "I've worked for everything I have, and I'm not waiting for you or anyone else to tell me that I matter." For the first time, she looked at me differently. There was a softness in her expression, a quiet realization that perhaps she hadn't truly seen me for who I had become. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it was a start. She didn't immediately apologize, but she finally said, "I've been blind to that, haven't I?" That conversation wasn't the end, but it was the beginning of a shift. For the first time in years, I felt like my mother was finally seeing me, not as the person who always tried to fit in, but as the person I had grown into. And for the first time, I didn't need her to validate me. I had already done that for myself. The conversation with my mom, though uncomfortable, was liberating. I had spoken my truth, something I had kept buried for years. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was pleading for her approval. I felt heard. But that was just the beginning. The real challenge came when I realized that in many ways, I had to keep proving to myself that I wasn't just a nobody. The world I had built, my career, my resort, my identity, was no longer something I had to hide or downplay. I had put in the work, the hours, and the sacrifices. But now, I had to own it fully. That meant pushing past the lingering doubts, the years of self-doubt that had been rooted in me by years of being overlooked. It meant stepping out of the shadows and embracing my accomplishments without shame. I started to share my story more openly. When people asked about the resort, I didn't just talk about the design or the beauty of the location. I talked about the journey it took to get there. I spoke about the struggles, the moments when I felt like giving up, and the pain of constantly being told I wasn't good enough. I told them about the months of working on that project while feeling invisible, while doubting whether anyone would ever see the work I was doing. And every time I shared my story, I noticed something new, a growing confidence, a sense of pride that replaced the doubt. The best part was when I started hearing from others. People who had been through similar experiences of being overlooked or underestimated. They started reaching out to me, sharing their own journeys of self-discovery and resilience. It felt amazing to know that my story wasn't just helping me, it was resonating with others. One evening I received a message from Sarah, the woman who had first opened my eyes to how much I had accomplished. She thanked me for letting her in, for showing her the real me, and for reminding her that success doesn't always come from the people who are closest to us. Sometimes, success comes from the people we least expect to be our biggest supporters. That moment was powerful. It wasn't just about me being recognized by my family or my community. It was about realizing that the world had already seen me for what I was, even when I didn't see it myself. And Sarah, who had once been a stranger to me, had become a source of support, a reminder that we often overlook our own worth until someone else shows it to us. I began to feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the hardships, for the pain, for the isolation I had felt all those years. Because without them, I wouldn't have had the strength to get where I was today. I didn't need anyone's validation anymore. I had finally found my own. And that was the most important thing of all. As I grew more comfortable in my own skin, something remarkable happened. The changes in me began to ripple through my family, especially with my mom. Though we still had a long way to go in terms of healing, the foundation was now laid for a better relationship. For the first time, it felt like she was genuinely trying to understand me, not just as her daughter, but as the person I had become. We began to have more honest conversations. They were difficult at first, awkward even, but they were necessary. One afternoon, we sat together in the living room of the resort I had built, my space, my creation. It was surreal, watching my mom walk around the place that I had poured my heart into. She was quieter than usual, but I could tell she was absorbing everything. "I've been thinking," she said, breaking the silence. "I don't think I ever really understood you. I've spent so much time focused on what I thought you should be, instead of seeing who you really were." It was one of those moments where time stood still. I didn't know whether to feel angry, relieved, or confused. All I could do was nod, acknowledging her words without needing to say anything. There was a level of vulnerability in her voice that I hadn't expected. She wasn't trying to defend herself. She was just being honest, something that had been rare between us in the past. That conversation didn't fix everything. In fact, there were moments after that where I doubted whether we would ever truly be on the same page. But what mattered was that she was trying. And for me, that was enough. I didn't need to rebuild the perfect mother-daughter relationship of my childhood. I just needed her to see me as I was now, a woman who had fought for her place in the world and was proud of what she had accomplished. My family's perception of me was shifting, slowly but surely. My brother, who had always been at the center of everything, began to notice the changes too. At first, it was subtle, just little comments here and there, acknowledging that I had done something impressive with my life. But, as time went on, I could tell that he was starting to see me in a new light. He wasn't threatened by me or resentful of my success anymore. Instead, there was a quiet respect in his eyes. And then came the day when it all came full circle. My brother invited me to dinner with him and Sarah. It wasn't a family gathering, just the three of us. Over dinner, he looked at me and said, "I don't think I ever told you this, but I'm proud of you. Everything you've done, it's incredible." It was a simple statement, but it was everything I had waited for. Not because I needed him to validate me, but because it was a moment of recognition that had been years in the making. And, for the first time, I felt like I was finally seen. By my mom, my brother, and, most importantly, by myself. As time went on, the weight of the past continued to lessen. The interactions with my family weren't always perfect, but they were real. I had stopped seeking validation from others, which allowed me to finally breathe. I no longer carried the burden of needing approval or love from people who had never truly understood me. It was freeing in a way I couldn't have imagined a year ago. I had started to focus on myself more, on the things that truly mattered to me. The resort, once a symbol of proving myself, was now a place I could pour my passion into because I loved it, not because I needed it to fill a void. I began to look beyond the business side of things and focus more on what brought me joy. I began to mentor local young women who were trying to carve their own paths in the world, just as I had. I wanted to be the role model I never had, the one who showed up, who made things happen, and who didn't need anyone's permission to do it. Through all of this, I still maintained my bond with Sarah. She had become more than just my brother's fiancée. She had become a true friend. We had gotten close over the past months, and she had been a constant source of encouragement. Sarah knew what it was like to feel like an outsider too, and having her in my corner felt like a breath of fresh air. One afternoon, as we were talking over coffee at the resort, she said something that made me pause. You know, you've completely changed the narrative of your life. What you've done is inspiring. It's not about proving anyone wrong anymore. It's about proving to yourself that you are enough. Those words stuck with me. They felt like a reminder of everything I had gone through. I hadn't just built a resort or created a career. I had built myself. I wasn't the person I had once been, the one who craved recognition from people who didn't see me. I had become someone who knew their worth, who was proud of what they had built, and who no longer sought approval from anyone outside themselves. I realized then that I had truly found peace. It wasn't perfect peace. It wasn't a peace that came without effort. But it was mine. I had fought for it, worked for it, and now I was living it. One evening, as I walked along the beach behind my resort, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I took a moment to reflect. The sound of the waves crashing on the shore, the salty breeze on my skin, it felt like everything had come full circle. I was no longer running from my past or seeking validation. I had built something solid, something real, and now it was mine. I didn't need anyone else's approval to feel worthy. I had already found it within myself. The journey had been long, but I was finally home. As the months passed, my life began to take on a rhythm I hadn't experienced before. The resort was thriving, and I was no longer just the owner of a business. I was someone who had learned to fully embrace her identity, her worth, and her voice. There was a sense of fulfillment now that wasn't just about financial success. It was about living in a way that aligned with my true self. I spent more time with Sarah, and our bond grew stronger. She became my sounding board, the person I could trust to tell me the truth, even when I didn't want to hear it. She pushed me to be more confident, to stop second-guessing myself. Sometimes we'd talk for hours about our experiences, our journeys, and the lessons we had learned. I realized that while I'd spent years searching for validation in my family, Sarah had been my mirror, reflecting back to me the strength I never realized I had. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. One morning I received a phone call from my mom. I hadn't heard from her in a while, and when I picked up, I could hear the hesitation in her voice. "Olivia, I've been thinking a lot about everything," she began, her voice quieter than usual. "I know I've made a lot of mistakes, and I didn't always support you like I should have. I've been reflecting, and I want to apologize." I wasn't sure how to respond at first. Part of me wanted to say everything I'd kept bottled up for years, to let her know how much her dismissiveness had hurt me. But I realized that in that moment, I didn't need to keep holding on to the anger. I'd worked through my pain. I had moved forward. And if this apology was her way of healing, I didn't want to block that. "Thank you, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "I appreciate that. But I also want you to know that I've let go of the need for your approval. I have built a life that I'm proud of, and I don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore, least of all to you." There was a silence on the other end of the phone. I knew she was processing what I'd said. "I understand," she finally replied. "I just want you to know that I'm proud of you too, Olivia. It wasn't the perfect resolution I had once imagined. There were still so many years of hurt and misunderstanding between us. But in that moment, I realized that I didn't need her to fix everything. I didn't need her apology to be complete. What mattered was that I had found my own peace. And that peace was something that no one could take from me. As I continued to live my life on my own terms, the sense of liberation became even more profound. The changes that had started as small shifts within me were now reflected in every part of my life. I wasn't the same person I had been years ago, the insecure, overlooked daughter who constantly sought approval. Now, I was confident in my own skin, not just in the business I had built, but in every decision I made. My worth wasn't determined by anyone else. It was something I had found deep within myself. The resort had become a thriving success, not just because of the business model or the beautiful location, but because I poured my heart into it. I began to expand it further, creating more opportunities for people to experience the peace I had found by the sea. It wasn't just about luxury accommodations. It was about creating a space where people could reflect, heal, and reconnect with themselves. It was the very thing I had needed all those years. I was proud of what I had built, but even more, I was proud of the person I had become. One day, Sarah and I took a walk along the beach. It was a peaceful evening, the sky painted in shades of pink and orange, and the waves gently lapping at the shore. As we walked, we talked about everything and nothing, life, love, goals. She looked at me with a smile and said, "I don't think you fully realize it, but you've created something incredible. You've built not just a business, but a legacy. You didn't let your past define you." Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. It was as if everything I had been working for, everything I had fought for, suddenly crystallized in that moment. I had spent so many years wondering if I would ever be good enough, and now I realized that I was not only good enough, I had become something more than I had ever imagined. I thought about my past, the years of being overlooked, the times when I felt like a failure, the countless times I had compared myself to my brother and tried to fit into a mold that wasn't meant for me. But in that moment, I knew that those years of struggle hadn't been in vain. They had shaped me into the person I was today, and I was proud of her. That evening, as the sun set and we stood together on the beach, I realized that I had finally let go of the need for external validation. I no longer sought anyone's approval. I had found my own sense of worth, and that was more powerful than anything anyone could give me. The journey wasn't easy, and I didn't know what the future held. But I knew one thing for sure. I had built my own life, on my own terms, and nothing could take that from me. The more I lived in this new chapter of my life, the more I realized that the journey wasn't just about finding success or recognition. It was about learning to trust myself, to believe in my own abilities, and to let go of the need for others to validate my worth. The beach resort, now flourishing with visitors from all walks of life, stood as a testament to everything I had fought for. But more importantly, it stood as a symbol of my inner growth, the strength I had built from the ashes of self-doubt. As the years passed, I noticed something extraordinary. The people who had once overlooked me, who had failed to see my worth, were now starting to recognize my value, not because I demanded it, but because I'd learned to see it in myself. It wasn't about rubbing my success in their faces. It was simply the natural result of me choosing to take control of my life. My mom, once a distant figure, became a quiet supporter. She didn't always know how to express it, but I could feel the shift in our relationship. We had conversations without the old tension, and while I still didn't need her approval, there was a sense of peace when we talked. It wasn't about forgiveness, but about understanding that we were both doing the best we could with what we had. Even my brother, who had been the golden child for so long, began to see me in a new light. We talked more openly now, and although we were different, we respected each other. He no longer saw me as competition or as someone beneath him. He saw me as a person who had worked hard for everything I had, and he respected that. But the most important realization came from within me. I no longer carried the burden of proving myself. I had already done it. I had already achieved everything I set out to do, and more. I was no longer the girl who wasn't good enough, the one who fought for attention or acceptance. I was Olivia, the woman who built something from nothing, the woman who had finally learned her worth. The sun set on that beautiful beach one evening, the same beach where my journey had begun. I stood there alone, taking in the view, feeling the wind against my skin, and I couldn't help but smile. I wasn't looking for anyone's approval anymore. I wasn't trying to fit into anyone's mold. I had created my own path, and I was finally free. I looked out at the ocean, a sense of peace settling in my chest. I did it, I whispered to the wind. And in that moment, I realized I had finally become the person I was always meant to be.